There is an old story about a woman who lived alone and went to a pet store to buy a talking parrot. Now she thought that the bird might feel some of her lonely hours. The owner of the store assured the woman that the bird had a vocabulary of about 1000 words plus 50 phrases. The deal was made and the parrot was brought home. The very next day, however, she came back to complain that bird doesn't talk. The store owner asked if she had a mirror in the cage, and the woman said she didn't. Oh, parrots love mirrors, and when he sees his reflection in the mirror, he'll just start talking right away. So he sold her a bird cage mirror. Now the woman was back the next day annoyed that a parrot still hadn't said a word. That's very peculiar, said the pet expert. How about a swing? Birds really love these little swings, and a happy parrot is always a talkative parrot. So the woman bought a swing, took it home and installed it in her cage. But she was back the next day with the same story. Does he have a ladder to climb? The salesman asked. That just has to be the problem. Once he has a ladder, he'll probably talk your ears off. So the woman then bought a ladder. The woman was back at the pet store when it opened the next day. From the look on her face, the owner knew something was seriously wrong. Didn't your parrot like the ladder? He asked. His repeat customer now looked up and said, that parrot died. I'm so sorry, the stunned businessman said. Did he ever say anything? Well, yes, said the woman. He finally talked just before he died. In a weak little voice, he asked me, don't they sell any bird food or bird seed in that pet store? Friends, like the bird, our hearts too need some real nourishment, the ones that feed the soul. Sometimes we forget what's really important in life. We get so caught up in the things that are good that we end up rejecting the things that are truly necessary. When I talk to an average young person today, I'm shocked to find the number of sexual trysts, substance use and alcohol that they have had in search of happiness. They live by these 6 words: been there, done this, tried this. We have actually become hollow, trivial and empty people. The most sacred things of life, like sexuality and life itself, is trivialized. That's why youngsters are finding meaninglessness, because very early in their teens, they have felt, tasted, seen and experienced what was reserved for only matured eyes and ears. Neil Postman was an American author, educator, media theorist and cultural critic who once said, we are amusing ourselves to death. Friends, we live in a world of abundance and surplus, but why is it that we wake up in darkness all around? In the midst of abundance, there is brewing anxiety, stress and unhappiness. We find ourselves emptied of meaning. And despite living around surplus, youngsters today feel a sense of emptiness. And one reason is that we consider our bodies as a fun house. Now eventually the fun ends and the house becomes empty. And this leads to emptiness, leading to breakups, dependency, insecurity and suicide. When there's nothing to look forward to, some want to make an exit from their hollow existence. After Marilyn Monroe had taken her life, her husband Joe was asked, why did Marilyn take her life? His answer was, she had everything to live with, but nothing to live for. Friends, pleasure for the sake of pleasure leads to meaninglessness. The cancer of our time can be described in this one word, meaninglessness. And G.K. Chesterton, the English writer and philosopher, said, meaninglessness does not come from being weary of pain. Meaninglessness comes from being weary of pleasure. And all those who are fed up with life are those who have exhausted pleasure. They have emotionally and physically driven themselves to impotency. Now, pleasure is short-lived, happiness is long-lived. Pleasure is visceral, whereas happiness is ethereal. Pleasure is taking, whereas happiness is giving. Pleasure can be achieved with substances. Happiness cannot be achieved with substances. And finally, the most importantly, pleasure is tied to dopamine, the pleasure neurotransmitter, while happiness is tied to serotonins, the happiness neurotransmitter. Now, corporates have been selling us pleasure disguised as happiness for a long time now. We are being robbed of happiness by companies working very hard to keep us addicted to things that provide us temporary pleasures. Many companies and brands, according to Robert Lustig, attempts to associate happiness with the purchase of their products and the use of their services, hoping that customers will turn to them for a better life. Mobile phones, social media, fast food, coffee, gambling, pornography, and even shopping is one of the ways modern life feeds our dopamine-based pleasure and reward system. These simple pleasures actually become obstacles to our pursuit of happiness and well-being. The extremes of pleasure all lead to addiction, whether they be substances or behaviors. There is a scientific reason why pleasure stops us from happiness. Pleasure releases dopamine, and dopamine stimulates the reward circuits and can create addiction because the intensity of the impulse. It has to be stronger every time you fire them. Next time, you need a bigger shot to get the same rush. And you need a bigger hit and a bigger hit and a bigger hit until finally it takes a huge hit to get nothing. And that's when the neurons start to die, and that's called as addiction. Excess dopamine can lead to addiction, which erodes both the present and your future happiness. But while these dopamine hits feel good in the moment, they are also suppressing the serotonins in our brain, the chemical responsible for the feeling of calmness and happiness. That's why addictions and depressions are different sides of the same coin. So, striving for pleasures will cut off the road to happiness. Dopamine and serotonins are, according to various studies, incompatible substances. When our body secretes one, it reduces the other. In simple neuroscience terms, dopamine down-regulates serotonins. As a result, the more pleasure we seek, the more unhappy we get. Happiness, on the other hand, is driven by a neurotransmitter, serotonin, which has nothing to do with dopamine-driven reward pathway. The key to raising happiness is to get your serotonins up and reduce your dopamine. The 4 C's, which will lower the dopamine and increase your serotonins. And the first C is to connect. Anything short of a face-to-face interaction is not a connection. Connect with your eye-to-eye human contact, not social media. It was studied that literal face time with eye contact generates a phenomenon we call empathy, and empathy definitely helps in producing serotonins. The second C is contribute. We need to contribute to something outside of ourselves for the benefit of society and the world at large, and this helps to produce serotonins. Contribute in the forms of giving, from which you gain no material reward. The third C is cope. It is studied that one can cope by getting enough sleep and exercise and by being mindful. According to Dr. Lustig, sleep deprivation increases the cortisol and causes depression, which is why your sleep needs to be prioritized. One of the biggest causes of sleep deprivation is going to bed with that mobile in your bedroom. He also recommends exercise as a big part of coping, as it can bring down your cortisol. And the final C is perhaps the most unexpected one, what is called as cook. Cooking is an essential part of any happiness-focused lifestyle. One needs to cook to get some nutrients one needs, and in the right amount. You need tryptophan, high omega-3 fatty acids, and you should be low on sugars in your diet. And that's what is known as a real diet. Now, there are 3 items in the food that have to do with pleasure versus happiness. The number 1 is tryptophan, which is a precursor to serotonins. You find it in eggs, some in poultry, and maybe little in fish. The number 2 important part of the diet is omega-3 fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory. And finally, be careful of fructose, because it depletes your serotonins, ups your dopamine, and causes metabolic syndrome, which is said to be a total disaster. Basically, cutting out processed foods will make more than just your gut happy, and processed foods is low in tryptophan low in omega-3 and is high in fructose. Friends, if you want to live a life filled with lasting happiness rather than filling it with temporary pleasures, then remember to connect, contribute, cope and cook.